Thank you for listening to the Redfield Arts Revue. This is your announcer, Mary Ann Perry. Brought to you by...
Ei, ja hab kein Pennenes, ja hab kein Pennenes, das ist. Hab Reuten, wo steiren, en euch dem Meieren, en Pirogen, wo's machen gesehen. Ei, ja hab nicht kein Pennenes, ja hab kein Pennenes, das ist. Der Italiener, yes, mino gatto de bananos.
The Redfield Arts Revue presents In Conversation with Mark Wheatley. In this program, illustrator and artist Mark Wheatley talks about his career as an artist and publisher in the comics industry and his recent book, Songs of Giants, The Poetry of Pulp, the illustrated anthology of poems written by H.P. Lovecraft, Edgar Rice Burroughs, and Robert E. Howard inspired a companion audio collection with readings by Mark Redfield and original music by Jennifer Rouse.
I loved recording the poems that you had assembled for Songs of Giants, the poetry of pulp. And I was surprised by things that I didn't know that were written by these three authors. And I thank you enormously for asking me to the dance and saying, hey, would you record these and do this?
I think you did an amazing job. I feel blessed that you were a part of it, and I really do feel upstaged by both the work you and Jennifer did. I am absolutely serious. It is a mind-blowing, I mean, you really brought those poems to life, and especially the ones that Howard, Robert E. Howard wrote.
Yeah.
Because he wrote, usually speaking his work out loud, both his poems and his prose. And so the idea that he would do that, you can really envision it when you're speaking.
Flaming Marble by Robert E. Howard. I carved a woman out of marble when the walls of Athens echoed to my fame, and in the myrtle crown was shrined my name. I wrought with skill beyond all mortal ken, and into cold inhuman beauty then I breathed a touch of white and living flame. And from her pedestal she rose and came to snare the souls and rend the hearts of men. Without a soul, without a human heart, she shattered mortal love and mortal pride, and even I fell victim to my art. With bitter, joyless love I took my bride, and still with frozen hate that never dies, she sits and stares at me with icy eyes.
And the best poems, I think, are like Shakespeare. They're meant to be heard. Mm-hmm. They're meant to be spoken out loud, and they're much more enjoyable. The character stuff that, and the tricky thing about Howard for me was trying to break the rhythm so they're not all so heavy, so that the reading is not as heavy as a sword or a shield or something. And then by the time, if anybody knows Edgar Rice Burroughs, they know that he also wrote Westerns, right, and they are a lot of fun. And the story, the one about My Pal Bill, is the Ballad of My Pal Bill, or whatever it's called, is just, it's maybe not a big knee slapper, but it's so charming getting to its punchline, and that's one of his Western poems. Yeah. So where did the idea, you've been doing so many different things in some of your work in recent years, and when I first met you, I think it was Frankenstein Mobster was the hot thing that you had just come out of the oven.
Yeah, so that would have been, when we went to the comic book, that would have been like early 2000s, 2004, 2005, something like that. Maybe, something like that. And Frankenstein Mobster originally started back in the 90s, and I was all set to start. Our website, InsideStudiosGroup.com, at that time was extremely popular online, and I think it was largely due to the fact that there wasn't a whole lot of other visual material online. every year we were winning design awards for our website, which was, a picture and some type. I mean, there was no option to do much design back then because the code wouldn't support it. So we had comics up every week, and people would come. We had millions of people hitting our site, and so I started developing the Frankenstein Mobster as a daily strip that would appear on our site. And then we got really busy with the publishing because the books took off, and so I had to put it aside.
Yeah, who was Insight Studios
at that time? It was a lot of guys. There were about 19 guys were on there. But the primary ones that folks were familiar with would be myself, Mark Hempel, Frank Cho, Alan Gross, Neil Vokes, Gray Morrow, Mike Oming, Robert Tennell, Alex Sevick.
And I know Tennell, Bob Tennell fairly well, and Neil Vokes. We're friendly, and I've only gotten to know Mark Hempel in the last couple of years, doing some events with him and the Baltimore Comic Con, and being able to chat with him and see his work and talk about stuff.
Really talented guy.
I'd love to see, before we talk about what's happening now in new work, it'd be nice if Frankenstein Mobster, if some other things could come about with that. And it only pops into my head as we're talking right this moment that depending on what's tied up, it might be kind of fun to do some kind of audio drama thing with him.
Yeah, certainly could. I own all of my titles, and I've maintained control of them. I have one title optioned at the moment for movies, which is Blood of the Innocent.
Yeah.
But we actually not only...
Is there any more you can talk about that now?
It's Hollywood.
So you wait.
And if you've ever seen the chart of the 87 steps to getting something into a theater, we're stuck in that loop around step 36. It's just been going on and on and on and on. New director, new script, new director.
Well, I don't want to pitch.
New director, new script.
I don't want to pitch you, but literally just sitting here talking about it and remembering, what I know about it. And it's a title that always, Frankenstein Mobster, not a play, obviously.
The script exists. It would be something we could do.
I think that
I wrote it.
People love that title.
I wrote it as a film. I wrote it as a film first, and then did the comic.
And I'm curious always about that kind of process because, I've made some films and I'm reverse engineering some of my things. I have a sometime writing partner named Stuart Wojtyla. We wrote a pirate script, Mistress of the Seas, about the true life Anne Bonny and Mary Read. Right. We're talking about reverse engineering that into an audio drama because it's a fun script we wrote, but it was written with a lot of swashbuckle visual. Well, tell me about that process. Well,
I had written for television in the mid '90s for HBO, and put together a writing team. But the moment I got into writing for television, I realized how little I knew about writing. Editors, I'd had some good editors in comics, but the best editors I'd had in comics largely were cheerleaders and traffic cops. They made everything run on time. They would make sure you were happy and supported, but they let you pretty much do what you're going to do.
Yeah.
And I took writing courses in college, but they didn't really teach us much. They had us read a lot, and then they had us write some stuff, and then it got a grade.
Right.
So I started working with, and I can't remember her name now, but the story editor for the series we were doing, which was Troll Tales, we could probably figure this out because she played Grandmama on the syndicated Addams Family.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's way out there in the boondocks.
Vancouver. She was up in Vancouver.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Anyway, so we'd get into these long conversations about what I was doing with my scripts and stuff, and she was just brilliant. I mean, she really understood, like 3 or 4 different schools of thought about structure on story and stuff, and I was learning so much. I actually the final script I ended up doing with her, I rewrote it 3 times on my own from scratch, just because I thought I could get some more out of it.
Yeah.
And she was cheerleading me after that. But by the way, this also says how much I love comics too, because after working like 2 or 3 years, 2 seasons of this show, with the television stuff and making better money and being treated better generally than I was in comics. When the series wrapped, she came back to me and she said, I'm starting a new series in the fall, and I'd love to have you be a part of my writing team. Give me a call in September. Well, by the time September came, I was back doing comics, and it was like a year later, I woke up at like 3 a.m. I went, damn, I was supposed to call her.
So in a lot of ways, this 2-year on that piece in that writer's room, in that writing team, was kind of a side step of forward momentum.
Yeah.
You were coming out of comics and then back in.
Yeah. But it also gave me a taste of what it was like to write a script for, film production type thing. And so I decided I wanted to try to, well, we had our Hammer of the Gods. Mike Omi and I did Hammer of the Gods together, and we're getting ready to do it again. And it had been optioned for a motion picture from New Line Cinema. And they came up with this script that was laughable in its infidelity to the original material. It was, I won't even get into it, but it was just so far away from what we were doing. And in the scripts kept going back and forth and back and forth. And finally, the producers came to us and said, we're not sure that this is a filmable book. And I said, how do you know?
Yeah.
And so I kept telling them, look, I'd be happy to take a crack at writing a bad script for $150,000.
Sure.
Yeah, give me a crack at it. And so I decided I was going to try to really master this film writing thing. And I set out to write a new thing, and I wrote Frankenstein Mobster as a film script. And, I put a lot more time into it than I probably should have. It took about 9 months carefully going through it each time and honing it and pulling it apart and putting it back together and analyzing it. And finally got it to the point where I liked it a lot. And I gave it to my Hollywood guy, and he took it around, and we got the first guy in line who wanted it was Jerry Bruckheimer.
Wow. Yeah.
And at that time, I when he came to me, I hadn't finished the script. And I said, I want to know what it is before I'd offer selling it to you. And he goes, all right, well, call me. So we had like 33 directors and film producers come at us about this thing. And then Helsing came out.
Interesting. Van Helsing.
Van Helsing. Yeah.
Hugh Jackman.
Yeah. And instantly everybody's like, nobody wants classic monsters.
I need to wedge in here for a minute because, and what year is The Brush with New Line Cinema?
Oh, God. I
Ballpark it.
I lose track.
See, the thing is...
Late 90s, I guess?
The interesting thing is that I have stories that parallel.
By the way, I love the team that was working on it. Some of the most brilliant people I've ever worked with. And when I finally asked them, why do you keep making such bad scripts? They said, because that's what they pay us to do.
The gatekeepers, it's always the gatekeepers. But bizarrely enough, we kind of parallel, although I think my brush with the New Line was a few years earlier. My sometime writing partner, Stuart Wojtyla, who I've created the Vampire Hunters Incorporated thing with, when that was a screenplay, we started it as an independent, raised money, and it didn't really work. And we wrote a novel, and then we started sending it around. And New Line passed on it as a film. And a couple of years later, they got back into touch and said, remember that thing about Vampire Hunters? We're going to do some television. We'd like to think of it. And I thought, okay, now our ticket's written. And they passed on it.
Yeah.
And then oddly enough, I think before we started recording, I was talking about reverse engineering a screenplay that Stuart and I wrote, which was a story that Stuart wanted to do based on the Pirates, Anne Bonny and Mary Read. And we wrote a script called Mistress of the Sea, which now we're kind of reverse engineering into a drama. That was sent to Michelle Pfeiffer's company. And parallel to your story, Cutthroat Island had come out, and nobody wanted to look at pirate pictures again until Bruckheimer does the deal with Disney and does with Johnny Depp Pirates of the Caribbean. So it's always very exciting, but I think this is a universal story that a lot of people have.
Because there are never bad movies.
Yeah.
There are only bad genres. You know, I mean, if the public doesn't want a genre, it couldn't possibly. They don't want a bad movie. Right. So.
But so this is the first incarnation of Frankenstein Mobster, and then when did you decide, and what was the reasoning into? Well, let's make it into a book.
Yeah, I had become too successful as a publisher, and
Insight Studios.
Yeah, and I was spending my entire time, being Mr. Businessman on the phone all day long with distributors and bookstores and setting up signings, and
that was when this was a good business to be in.
Well, for a brief period there, yeah, it comes and goes. Right. It has its moments, I stepped back and I told my guys at the studio, look, I need some help. We were a partnership. Everybody was supposed to be kicking in, but I was the one doing all the business and they were having all the fun. So I said, I'm going to do this work here. This is what I'm good at. And I will make sure I keep all my contacts and distribution going, but you guys need to step up and do this, this, and this. And they all said, no, we don't want to do that.
So was the structure, and this is curious to me, was the structure of the company very much dare I use the word, was it a collective, and the hierarchy and the job descriptions weren't clearly defined?
No, everybody would pitch in wherever, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what?
United Artists, let's make our art, and Mark is going to sell it. Yeah. Because you elected yourself.
And I would take a cut from whatever was passing through my hands. And I was offering that back for them to kick in and start, Right. And, I was a sugar daddy in a way because, I gave people office space for free and they got to use equipment for free and they, I didn't charge them for that stuff.
So now Frankenstein Mobster becomes a book, which I don't want to spend all of our chat, and we'll have lots of chats in the future. But
the major difference between what I did for the film,
and then on a just purely on a writer technical thing, because I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to write screenplays, how to make screenplays visual, even though Orson Welles says it's okay to have a narrator, and I agree with that. But there's a certain amount of you're condensing and you're tightening to come into a story late and tell a story, and keep it moving. Mm-hmm. And with a comic book, graphic novel, what have you, you're condensing on top of condensing in a lot of ways. So, or am I wrong about that?
I actually expanded the comic book.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, there were multiple issues. We did 7 issues. And the major difference between what I did for the film and what I did in the comic is that I added an opening chapter, which introduced the characters in a much more leisurely way. And in movies, it's all about the action and keeping things moving and moving and moving.
Right.
Here, I was able to really set back and let the character tensions hold your interest.
Become a little more novelistic, literary.
So it has a new beginning. But it leads right into the beginning of the movie.
So take a hard right turn onto another thing, because you have a fascinating, enormous collection of old magazines, of pulp magazines. I love the pulps. My love of it is not as broad or as deep as your reading. I come at it like many do. As a teenager, I'm a Tarzan fan. My exposure to the Shadow was on the radio, but that led to Gibson's novels, collecting some of the magazines, not as hardcore as I've seen your collection is spectacular. And that then led to other pulp titles, pulp characters. And I love the subgenre. I love these action heroes and these heroes of mystery, and very few of them are superheroes other than maybe somebody like a Doc Savage, which a lay audience may have heard of.
Maybe the original superhero.
The original superhero, sure.
I think John Carter probably is the original superhero, but Doc Savage really conceptualized it as an ongoing sort of comic booky sort of formula.
And then somehow, and I'm trying to drive way around the block to come back to Songs of Giants, the poetry of pulps. What little did I know from my exposure at the age of 14 throughout all of my life of just being a fan and loving the adventure stories was that, and then it's funny because in hindsight, well, they are writers, and there isn't a writer that I don't know that hasn't dabbled in poetry. At what point did you realize that they, and some may be more obvious than others, Lovecraft, for instance. But
I think it's a mark of a certain kind of author that they're willing to admit it.
And so yeah. I mean, when you go back to, and you know that I'm working on a lot of Edgar Allan Poe stuff, and he thought of himself as a poet. That's what he woke up in the morning. I'm not an editor. I'm not a newspaper editor. I'm not a prose writer. I'm a poet. That's what he. But at what point did you find out that these heroes who wrote these great books, like Burroughs, Robert E. Howard, who everybody listening will know?
Howard introduced me to it.
Really?
Yeah, because I really enjoyed reading Howard when I was a kid. You know, his stuff is just so visceral and so honest and just laid out. And but I lost enthusiasm reading the collections that were coming out in the 60s and 70s because it just seemed to eventually get weak. And I moved away from it. And then as I got older and I realized that there were, you know, clean manuscripts and things that, you know, L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter had like bastardized everything and, you know, and pastiched it together and stretched it out.
That's a whole
that's what was
in and of itself.
That's what was causing me to lose enthusiasm because I was mentally confusing the pastiches with the original material, and it was so obvious. And now you look at it, how poor the pastiches are compared to the original material. So I started a quest to find the pure material. And that has never let me down. The really good stuff and tons of poetry. I mean, all sorts of poetry because I'm getting the journals now, that Robert E. Howard journals and things, the stuff that the fans are putting together, and they're just lots and lots of poetry. And so one of my friends, Tim Truman, who did Scout and Grimjack and you know, just an excellent artist and creator, he and I got started together at First Comics, and that's when we became friends. And found out that we were both into music, and that he is like one of the world's great guitar players. He's played with the Grateful Dead. He's played with Santana, you know, and you know just to hang out, you know, not like touring with him or anything, right? You know? And so I used to get him down because he lives up in Pennsylvania. I used to get him down for a pizza, and we would lay down some tracks together. And he just did some beautiful stuff. We did a record that was in the Dracula comic that I did ages ago, a little flexi disc, and I just loved working with him. And he had just started writing the Conan material for Dark Horse, and I got in touch with him. I said, "Man, I'm thinking that these poems that Robert E. Howard did would make fantastic lyrics for rock songs. Yeah, what if we put together an album, man?" And he was like, "Oh, that's really cool. I don't know when I'd have time to do it though." And you know, we're both really in that boat, right? Yeah. But it's one of those dream projects. So I took a couple of the lyrics that I thought were really appropriate, and I did one called Surrender, and I laid down the basic tracks and stuff, and I sent it to Tim, and I said, so I envisioned this with this lead guitar part, you know, and if you just want to lay them down. And he said, well, I can come down and do it with the onside. So it just kept getting delayed. Never happened. And finally one day I got to the point with my setup where I got a guitar controller, and I was able to fake lead guitar now pretty well. So I laid down a fake lead guitar track.
Technology, and it's incredible time. But anyway.
I know. And I was able to lay down at least a passable lead guitar track, and then I sent that to him. He says, what do you need me for?
One day when the day is done and the stars begin to quiver, I will follow the road of the setting sun till I come to a dreaming river. I am weary now of the word and bow of the winds and the winter weather. I'll reel through a few more years somehow, then I'll put them all together. I'll go to a girl that once I knew, and I will not swerve for her. And I care not if she be false or true, for I am not true to her. Her eyes are fierce and her skin is brown, and her wild blood hotly races. But it's little I care if she does not frown at any man's embraces. Should I ask for a love none may invade? Is she more or less for me, a bamboo hut she'll share, and enough to give love to set me free from the ghosts that live and stare. Sleep through days without name or number, with only the wind and the sky's blue deep to haunt my unshaken slumber. And alive by night in the sorrowed huts, forgetful and quiet-hearted, till she comes with her burning eyes half shut and her red lips hard and parted. The past is foam when the cup is full, and there is no chain for leaking, and any woman is beautiful when a man is blind with drinking. Life is a lie that cuts like a knife, with its sorrows and fading blisses. I'll go to a girl who asks naught of life, save wine and a drunkard's kisses. No man shall know my race or name, or my past, sunlight or autumn, till I travel the road by which I came, forgetting and soon forgotten.
But still, it was about the time that it was really getting there where we were realizing we could do this. Mm-hmm. That I thought less in terms of just the creative enthusiasm, but more in the marketing. It's like, it's hard to sell a comic book these days through the comic book market. We want to sell a little CD of music that nobody can hear to the comic book market, and we certainly can't sell it to the real music market. So what are we doing? So I backed away from it, and I have the King and the Oak, which is the King Called poem, like half done, and never finished it, which is just as well because it's not in the public domain. It at the time people were claiming it was, but we did research, it's not. So that's where it sat for a long time, but it kept sticking in my mind, that. And one of the things I wanted to do is, if we had done this as a CD, Tim and I were going to illustrate the book of lyrics to go with it, right? And the frustration there was that it'd be the size of a CD because you want pictures to be big. And that was before the vinyl, enthusiasms. So, so time went on, and one day I did Dr. Cthulhu,
which was successful and made a lot of people happy. It was very popular.
And it took 6 years to get it off the ground because I created it based on a very slight knowledge of H.P. Lovecraft. I'd read some of his works, didn't know much about him, and realized after putzing around with it for about 4 years that I wasn't the right person to write Dr. Cthulhu because I wasn't immersed in Lovecraft.
Right.
And so I brought in G.D. Faulkson to write it, who really is immersed in that material, and he did a beautiful job with it. But in the process, I realized Lovecraft wrote all this poetry.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And I thought, wow, there are huge fandoms for Lovecraft and Howard. The only guy who isn't in here is Burroughs. I wonder if he wrote poetry. And so I went out and I looked, and there you go. He wrote poetry.
And for those who don't know, who are listening, of course, Mark Wheatley is an enormous Burroughs fan, Edgar Rice Burroughs fan, and has produced an enormous amount of work with various.
Yeah, I started
Burroughs
out
characters.
packaging the comic books for Tarzan back in the 90s, the early 90s, and I've had an association with the Burroughs Company ever since.
Yeah.
So, which helped for Songs of Giants because I literally only had to call one phone number to get permission to use the material.
My Mother Was a Wildcat by Edgar Rice Burroughs. My mother was a wildcat. My father was a bear. I picks my teeth with barbed wire. With cactus combs my hair.
And like I said earlier, I love the Burroughs Western stuff that's in it. It just really breaks all of the sword and sorcery and not everything. And this was the other surprise about the poems that you picked for the book and for this album, that they're not all dark and terrible. And we have these conceptions of some of our literary heroes like Lovecraft. And suddenly we realize he's writing about the 4th of July and
Santa Claus.
And he's writing about Santa Claus. And there's a little Hallmark card, a little Lovecraft Christmas card ditty that he sent to friends, apparently.
Yeah.
I don't know, sat on the, in Providence and sang with a bell.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. But the diversity of little touches and stories and verses is just very refreshing about the whole thing.
And that is what really excited me as an illustrator.
Yeah.
Because essentially almost every 2 pages in the book, it's an entirely new genre and take and atmosphere and mood. And it was an incredible range of illustrations I was able to play with. And
for those who haven't seen it, obviously we'll have in the links and everything else where you can go to look at this and order it, but and look at the samples of the work, because it really is eclectic, and I love the dynamic quality that you gave to these, because you're capturing, in an illustration, you're capturing sometimes a mood, sometimes an exact moment that captures that mood in that poem, and I think you're doing that really, really well in those things.
Well, sometimes you want to hit it on the nose, and sometimes you want to come on sideways to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the poems are like that, right? Sometimes they're impressionistic, sometimes they're specific.
Yeah. And not any one writer is predictable.
No.
The same writers will do different things.
Mm-hmm. And it's like Burroughs, like the poems you're talking about, those are essentially stories told
ballads,
as
stories.
Yeah, ballads. Yeah. Yes, exactly right.
Yeah. Well, the cover, the choices of the imagery on the cover, what is that referring to? Who is that?
That was me trying to evoke the feeling of everything at one time. Mm-hmm. It's not specific to any author or any poem, but it has the jungle cat, which appears several times in motifs in those poems. It has the ancient civilization of Babylon, which is mentioned specifically and generally throughout the various different poems. And it's got a sexy girl on the cover. I'm not quite sure how I came to that.
There is the one about the lady. It's kind of a sad poem.
The one from Nantucket, right.
Right. But again, I am just so grateful that you asked me to do this. At what point did you realize? Because you started with a song, and then this wonderful book came out of your selections. Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to assume, this isn't even a question, we've never talked about it, but I'm just assuming that the poems you collected are the poems you liked. Yeah. There was no other criteria.
It's an intersection of the ones I really liked.
Yeah.
The ones that would fit together and make an interesting book, and the ones that were in the public domain or I could get the rights to.
Right. And then even-handed, every author had you're not light on any one particular author, which is pardon me, always good in a collection like this. Mm-hmm. I was really hoping that it would give people a new way to look at these authors specifically, but also in general to let people know there's a lot going on in pulp magazines. People look down at them, but there was a lot of good material that came out of that. And somehow when the wonderful books that came out of the pulps went on to become huge literary favorites, they somehow lose their connection to the pulps. Whereas, it doesn't, it's not like a two-way street. It really should be. So they deserve some respect. Who's publishing mainstream anymore, these authors? You know,
Well, Titan publishes a lot of
Titan does,
material.
because when I was coming up,
Yeah.
you could walk into any. Do these names ring a bell? Walden Books, Cole's Bookstore, all of these little outlets that had little outposts in emerging malls across America, and at any given time, 75 to 82, 83, you could pick down off the shelf a paperback of Burroughs Tarzan, a Lovecraft collection.
You can probably walk into a Barnes & Noble today and find a Burroughs book on the shelf.
Yeah, or they do those collections now.
That's what they do, yeah.
$20, big fat, here's everything.
Yeah, so you get the
ever
first 3 Mars books, you get the first 3
That's
Tarzan
right.
books,
Yeah.
you know.
I've noticed they did that with Baum's Wizard of Oz books and some others, but
It's always being repackaged. And for that matter, I think there's probably like 3 or 4 editions of H.P. Lovecraft available right now that are collecting his stories.
they're not the same old, same old. Who's what's the is readership opening up? Are younger people grabbing onto this stuff? I mean, I loved
Poetry is really hot right now.
and oddly, and that's because I love reading poetry, but that's good news.
Yeah. So maybe we'll get some interest from that. I mean, we do have a lot of folks who were signed onto the Kickstarter who were saying, I never heard of these guys before. This looks cool.
And that's encouraging. That's good.
Yeah.
You know, and they're getting the word of this for the first time through the internet, through either Facebook
So
or
you bring
Twitter
people in from comics because I've got a comics background. You bring people in from science fiction because Jack McDivitt, who wrote the introduction, is this huge science fiction author.
Right.
You know, Robert Heinlein Lifetime Achievement Award, the Nebula Award. I mean, he's done a little something.
So what's coming up next that I can work with you? No, what's coming next? Always.
We won't mention that one.
No, it's a little too early for that one, but I am going to be very much looking forward to working with you again. But what's coming up next for you? Other than,
San Diego's the next thing up for me. Conventions. Now we got to go out and sell the book. So I'll stand behind the booth. And in the middle of July, you can come get your copy of the book. And then the next convention after that will be Pulp Fest up near Pittsburgh.
In August.
Yeah, and that will be
hit
another
our
opportunity.
websites for all of these things.
And Mark, you're going to be at the Pulp Fest, right?
I'll be at Pulp Fest because I'll be there with some physical copies of Songs of Giants, the album. And I'll also have on Audible, I should have William Patrick Maynard's The Terror of Fu Manchu, an audiobook that I've recorded. And Bill Maynard is a mainstay, is one of the main guys at Pulp Fest. And then there's a bunch of little shows. We'll be at Baltimore Comic Con also.
We'll be there.
Year is this?
Yep.
2019, this year. So,
Yeah.
and then we'll be off to the new things and promoting the new things. So
Right. Yeah, but that's it. I've got a couple projects slated to be working on, but I don't know which one's going to be announced first.
good.
So, but I'm actually illustrating several books that are coming out. Thrilling Adventures from the Crazy 8 publishing group. That's a new pulp that I did illustrations for. A lot of great authors and other illustrators worked for them too, like Tom Mandrake and Jerry Ordway and Peter Krause and Mike Collins and then I'm also illustrating the sequel to Joseph Campbell's John W. Campbell's different Campbell. John W. Campbell's Frozen Hell, which was the basis for The Thing from Another World.
Yep, which is very exciting.
Yeah.
But even Joseph Campbell is exciting.
And that's coming out from Wildside Press. And
finally, to plug Redfield Arts Audio, our new Christmas Carol, which features your art, which I love.
Yep.
So that will finally see the light of day.
It's starting to feel a lot like Christmas.
Yes. Yeah. So let's hope that things keep moving in exciting ways. And I think these are projects that break out of the little niche genre markets in some ways.
I think so. I think they have a lot of interest. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's chat again soon. And I guess I'll see you in August.
All right. Well, it's been great seeing you. And we'll have to get together again sometime.
Good. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Redfield Arts Revue. If you'd like to find out more or order Mark Wheatley's book, Songs of Giants, please visit www.insightstudiosgroup.com.
Thank you for listening to the Redfield Arts Review. Please come back again for our next show. The Redfield Arts Revue and the original content of this program is copyright the Mark Redfield Company. Shopping for Explosives by Coconut Monkey Rocket. Licensed under Attribution Non-Commercial International License. All other content used by permission of the respective rights holders or used for educational and informational purposes. Original music, sound design, and engineering is by Jennifer Rouse. This is your announcer, Mary Ann Perry.
Ja, hab kein Pennenis. Ja, hab kein Pennenis, das ist. Hab Reuten, wo steiren, en euch dem Missmeiren, en Pirogen, wo's machen gesehen. Hey, ja, hab nicht kein Pennenis. Ja, hab kein Pennenis, das ist. Der Italiener, yes, Minogato de Bananos.